Hello and welcome to the Fat Dad Fishing Show. My name's Rich Natoli, your regular host of the show, and I'm really glad to do this one. This is going to be a tough one because it's one of those solo shows, and it's going to be more like a workshop type of deal, like I did a few weeks ago where I talked about how to find flounder spots. And I wanted to go, well, actually, it was by request, asked to go a little bit further into a previous video that I did, gosh, maybe 3 years ago now, where we talk about the effect of tides and current on spots and fishing, and wanted to go in and see what I could do with that and maybe bring it a little bit up to date, answer a few questions. But if you're listening to the podcast version of this might be one where you want to jump over and watch it on YouTube. You should still get some really good information out of it. I'll try to be as descriptive as possible, just so that if you're not looking at the visuals, you'll get a sense of what I'm talking about anyway. But yeah, we're going to dive into today just really what it, some real basics. First of all, there's a lot of, I guess, misunderstandings for how things work out on the water. And when it comes to water flow and currents and tides, one of the most popular questions that I hear is, what tide is best? Well, it doesn't really matter the tide. I'll just start right now, because the tide isn't what you should really be concerned about. For the most part, it's not the tide, it's actually the currents. And the currents are impacted by a lot of things. Tide is certainly one of them, the tidal flow when you're talking salt water. But there's also the wind and the moon. There's a lot that goes into it. So consider this a little bit of a basics type of a show to start off with. We'll talk about some of the terms that you should know and understand, and then we're going to dive into what it actually means when you're selecting a time to go fishing, and kind of marry that together with, now that we have all that information about the currents and the tides and the water flow, how are we going to find the spots after we have all that information, so that we kind of maximize our chances of catching these fish. Now, I want to make sure that it's clear, I'm not talking about pelagic fish. I'm talking more about the ambush predator fish. So think about a striped bass that's not on a migration. Think about weak fish, speckled trout, redfish, fluke or flounder. Those are the ones that I'm talking about. And this should be helpful to people as I go through it. And as I'm going through it, make sure if you have any questions, don't hesitate to put it into the chat. I will do my best, being here solo, to get to any questions that come up as I go through here. I already can't keep up, but thanks to the guys that are in the chat already, and those that are not chatting but are also on and watching. I do want to mention the sponsors of this. The first one is Great Bay Outfitters on Radio Road in Tuckerton, New Jersey. Outstanding kayak shop. If you're looking for anything kayak related, Paul and his team there are the ones that you want to go check out. I have not made it down there yet this year, and I can't wait to. I actually may switch my next trip to be a Great Bay trip, just so that I can swing by there on the way in, and then hopefully on the way out, maybe even grab Paul and get him on the water with me. And then there is the second sponsor, which is me. So I am a realtor in southeastern Pennsylvania. I've been incredibly busy, which is one of the reasons why we weren't able to do last night, the normal Monday. I had a lot of work to do. It was also my birthday, actually. So my wife and I were going to go out to eat dinner, but I've been really busy. But with that said, I always have time for referrals. If you know anyone in the area that's looking for, buying, selling a house, or even if they're an investor, have them reach out to me. My information is at the beginning, or they can just go to richardnatoli.com. That's my website. So with that said, I am going to jump into this one, and, again, ask questions in the chat, and I'm going to bring this on stage so that you can see it. We got to go over some terms, and just so that, if you're watching this, as I uploaded the slides, they look kind of wonky. So just, I'm doing my best here so you can see some of these things are overlapping, but I'm going to go through some of these terms just so that you can see exactly what we're talking about here. So in this case, we're going to talk about key tide terms, because people get them wrong. And if you're going to be talking about the tides and the flows and fishing and spots, you want to really know what you're talking about and use the correct terminology. So let's just start off real quick. We'll blow through this section, but just so we're all on the same page. First one is tide. That is the vertical rise and fall of the water. So it goes up and down. That's what it refers to, the depth of the water and how it changes over time. You have the current. This is the one that's most important to all of us. That's the horizontal flow of water, and it's typically by wind or tide. So as the tide comes in, it doesn't just, come up from underneath the bottom of the ocean and get deeper. It flows in from somewhere, and I'll go into that. And then, obviously the drop and the wind can blow it in, and the wind, as we know, can affect the depth and the currents and so on and so forth. You got wind against tide, which we'll talk about, and other things. Wind with the tide, that's a good way to fill up the sounds and keep them deep. If you have a really strong wind blowing in as the tide comes out, the water's not able to evacuate those sounds, and you get some more depth back there, and you get a little bit less current. Next one is spring tides. This is one of the things that are, man, people just get this wrong all the time. They call it spring tides because it's the spring. Has absolutely nothing to do with the spring or the seasons. A spring tide happens 2 times per month. It's the new moon and it's the full moon. Those are called spring tides. So you're going to get those all throughout the year, no matter what season it is. Then you have the neap tides twice per month, the first and third quarters of the moon. And those are going to actually be associated with less flow. And I'll show you why in a minute. Diurnal tides, one high, one low per day. You think of the Gulf of America, as it's called now. It's a diurnal tide. It's one high, one low. That's all they're getting. I think a lot of people often think that it's going to be the same all over the place. There are places that just get one in a day. Semi-diurnal tides, 2 highs and 2 lows. That's essentially the East Coast, not all of it, but the vast majority of it. And then you have mixed semi-diurnal tides. It's 2 highs, 2 lows at different depths. You see that in California a lot. And I know that we do have some California listeners to the podcast. That would be you. We also do have in the eastern coast, you will see that they're not exactly the same height of the tides on R2, but we generally have the semi-diurnal. Then you have the ebb tide. That's when it's falling. It's outgoing tide. That's the ebb tide. And flood tide just means it's rising. Water's flooding in, it's a flood tide. Water's coming out, it's an ebb tide. So those are the basics. Those are the terms that we all need to know. So let's go into the tidal current. That's the important thing. So if the tide is coming in on this left to right, it's getting deeper. You can see the low tide line is that dotted red dots all the way across the middle there. That's the depth when it's low tide. So it gets deeper, but the current is coming in, and that's where the water's coming from. So it doesn't just get deeper, all at once, all over the place. It has to flow in, and that's where your current comes in. It's going to go from where the water is coming into the backwaters. If we're talking about the backwaters, if we're talking about the East Coast, on the incoming tide, it's actually coming from the south to the north. If you're a surf fisherman, you know this, because when you're fishing and your line starts moving from right to left when you're facing out towards the east, that means it's an incoming tide. Generally, the wind can also do it, but generally speaking, the water's coming up from the equator, and that's what's pushing on the incoming, that's what's pushing it to the left. And then obviously on the outgoing, it's going to go more towards the right. So that's the direction of the current. Then we take a look at the tide. Look, you can see it's 3 feet shallower, high and low tide. That's it. It's just vertical. It doesn't matter. The current can be coming from either direction, but it's just the vertical change in the tides. So those are really simple. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that because most people are at least familiar with that. But I do talk to a lot of beginners, and they just don't get it. And they insist that one tide is better than another tide. And it's just, look, you can argue with me. I can't say I'm 100%, it's a fact, but I 100% believe it's all about the currents. I don't care if it's incoming or outgoing for the most part, as far as the water flow. The only time that really comes into play for me is 2 things. The first thing is on the incoming tide, you can generally have a different temperature of water coming from the ocean, whether it's warmer or cooler, and then vice versa on the outgoing. But then also, I tend to say that I prefer fishing the outgoing in certain weather or certain times of the year because, it pulls that water out, the warmer water out, but it also makes it a little bit more predictable of where these fish are going to be. If you're in the backwaters, if you're offshore, if you're out front, it doesn't matter. But if you're fishing areas where all of these, let's use flounder as an example, all the bait fish that they're feeding on in the backwaters are up in the sounds. Well, the sounds will start to dry out. It'll get shallower. The bait fish that are up there are going to get swept out and into these deeper channels, which means that the fluke that were up there in those sounds, they need to move too. They don't want to be sitting in, 4 inches of water. They want to move to something a little bit deeper through most of the year. And that means that it's more predictable. You take that entire, 3 square miles of a sound, and there's not as much water in there, and it's not as good of a place for them to ambush these bait fish that are in there, or their food sources. They're going to move into a more predictable area. But besides that, it's not really about the tide. You're going to have that on the incoming or the outgoing. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. Those are really the important things there. So let's talk about what spring tides are. The spring tides, again, those are the full moon and the new moon twice per month, all throughout the year. And this is why. You need to understand why. You need to understand this. So if you take a look at the graphic, for those that are listening on the podcast, we have the sun on the right of the earth, you have the moon on the left, and then we have this little representation of the water going around. And you can see the gravity of the sun and the gravity of the moon. It's going, the arrow is actually the wrong way on the gravity to the moon, but it's pulling the water away from the equator, which means that it's going to be more flow of water. The gravity is working together and working against each other on the spring tides. So it's going to make more water flow. That's why people say when it's a full moon or a new moon, the currents rip. And this is why. It's because the gravity of the sun and the gravity of the moon are working together in line, and it's pulling the water together. So it's going to make more of an impact, more tidal flow. The other side of that is the neap tides. This is all messed up when I uploaded it, but you can see this square thing at the top. That's actually a circle. That's the moon. So the moon, and on the quarter moons, the moon is off about 90 degrees for this representation from the sun. So you don't have as much pull on that water working together. You have the moon pulling up one direction, and then you have the sun pulling the other. So it doesn't pull to stretch out the water as much. It kind of pulls it in two directions at once. That's less of a change in tides, right? You're not going to have the same impact. You're not going to have the same flow of water during those. So that's why the neap tides are less powerful generally than what you have with a spring tide. So this is what they look like. This is a spring tide. This is a spring tide in New Jersey, and it is a spring tide actually from last night or from yesterday. So you can see in this tide chart, you can see where the lows are, and you can see where the highs are. So you have this large change in the depth, and you can see in here, this is the one part that I want you to look at. So when you're looking at the tidal flow, which is the most important thing, you want to look for where it's moving the most. So it's not moving, you can see down at low or up near high. You know, that last half hour, the first half hour of the high tide, and the same in the low tide. You have this line here that curves, is showing really the water flow. That'll tell you how much it's flowing and how quickly it's moving. It doesn't move much in these at the very peak and at the very valley. But in between, the steeper this incline of that line between the low tide and the high tide, the more tidal flow that you'll have, the more current that you'll have. And you look at it this way. If you're in a spot, any one spot, right, over any common bottom of the water column, it's going to fill up at high tide, and it's going to fill up in the same amount of time. So between 4:06 and 10:23 p.m. on this date yesterday, that's your entire incoming tide, right? So as the tide is incoming, because there's more water moving, it's moving more water in the same amount of time that it does in a neap tide. So, in a neap tide. So you're moving more water across the same period of time. So this is where the best tidal flow is. And if you ever look at the different charts that predict when the fish are going to be biting, it's typically going to be in that range where the water's really moving, because it brings the food directly into the ambush predators, and they can set up and wait for it. It sweeps them to a predictable place. So that's why that's what a spring tide looks like. Now, the other side of that is the neap tide, and you can look at the difference. So those that are watching this, take a look at the screen, look at that line on the right, and now let's change to the neap tide, and look at that. Look at this line. It doesn't move nearly as much. So you still have the same approximate low, but look, it doesn't go up nearly as high. It's a 1.5 foot difference in the same spot, the same tide station that I pulled for the next neap tide. So this is in New Jersey. This is the difference. So you had this 0.4 and it's going up to 3.3, whereas the last one moved all the way from the 0.4 up to a 4.5. So more water in the same amount of time means more flow, more current. And then look at this on the neap tide, it's just less. So that's why a lot of people say, they don't have luck fishing the full moon. It's the tide is too strong. Well, it doesn't mean the fish aren't there. It means that you're fishing the wrong spots. If you're fishing a spot that is generally productive on the weaker flowing current times, like a neap tide, it is entirely possible, because of the amount of water coming in on a spring tide, that it's just going to blow that spot out. There's too much current. So what you typically would do when you're looking at one of those spring tides is switch the spot a little bit. So find the similar structure in the similar area, but the spot within that area is going to change. And oftentimes, especially with fluke, it's not in the middle of that channel. It's not where that water is really cranking. It's on the edges. You look for the current seams, because they don't want to fight that strong current if they don't have to get their meal. They'll sit on the side and fight less, and they'll have the bait that kicks off to the side, and that's what they'll be picking off. So that's why you have to understand the water flow and the impact that it can have on you when you're out there on the water. So that's what you're looking at. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, because again, I think a lot of people know that, but this will help you, if you're not aware of this, to read these charts better and to pick your times to fish. If you want water flow, which you do for ambush predators, you want to avoid the valley at the bottom where there's very little water flow, and the peaks at the top where there's very little water flow. That's why, and there were previous podcasts over the years where people say, I love slack tide. Yeah, you can catch them at slack tide, but it becomes less predictable, because there's this area that you can see on the screen right now. It's not funneling bait fish anywhere. They can go anywhere at that time. It's not pushing them in any direction. You think of a crab or a grass shrimp that was getting pushed in a predictable area during this extreme area here where they couldn't fight the current as easily. Well, it's easy to know where it's going to go. The flounder just kind of find that spot and they sit there. But if they can go anywhere, they can swim and they can go against the little tiny currents that are in there. They can be anywhere. So the notion that fishing slack tide is the best time, no, it's the least predictable time. It doesn't mean you can't catch great fish or even your personal best or world records during that time. It just means it's less predictable. The fish don't have to be anywhere in particular, and it's hard to predict where they are when they can go anywhere and have the same chance at catching the fish. So that's how the tides work. That's how the currents can be seen in the tide charts. Look for the vertical, the more vertical the line is in this flow, the more flow that there is. And that's the area that typically is going to be better for fishing. And think about from the fish standpoint, if they're going to be feeding during a window, they're most likely going to be feeding in this section, because that's what's pushing the bait. That's where they know where the bait's going to go. Again, the slack tides, the period right before and the period right after, that's not true. Now, don't take this and say, okay, well, what about sheepshead? Sheepshead is not an ambush predator. Tog, it's not an ambush predator. You're feeding them crabs as their primary, and they're picking mussels and barnacles off of things. That's not what I'm talking about. A bluefish, not necessarily, because they're moving. They got those forked tails for a reason. They're moving. They're chasing their prey. Tuna, they're chasing their prey. So this is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about basic fish like the striped bass, talking about fluke, definitely about redfish, trout, speckled trout, and redfish, even snook. Those are the ones that you're going to want to look for in these more extreme areas. All right. So that covers that. if there are any questions, make sure you put them in there in the chat. Again, I'll do my best to find them. But let me remove this from the screen, because I think based on the comments that I got from the presentation that I did a couple of weeks ago, people want some more information on finding the spots. And Participation Trophy Fishing, who was in the chat, he did send me an email, had some really good points about positioning of boats. And I want to make sure that we kind of cover that. So boats are the same as kayaks, but it's much more difficult, generally speaking, to position a boat than it is a kayak. A kayak, you have much more control. And for boats, you have to plan. So you often hear me say that the boat captains get lazy. They'll find a spot. So take a look at this inlet here. They'll find a spot, right? And they'll find the easiest drift. So they'll set up, and here's an easy drift. If you're going to drift, I don't know why you'd want to, but if you drifted this inlet, they'd start here and just drift straight on in. That's great. And it's really not, there's nothing going on the bottom here. These are all the contour lines, but look at the depth. The depth isn't changing. It's 21.5 feet all along this middle section. And this is, generally speaking, not necessarily this inlet, but other channels in the backwaters. This is, generally speaking, where you see the boats. They're just kind of drifting all alongside each other, just straight on in, right? Well, that's not going to help you. And we'll go into that. So that's why I say they're lazy. And the reason is, if you look at spots where you're more likely to have the fish like this, where you have this drop off of the, what is this, 28 feet down to 35 feet. This is actually going to, it's the drop. It's this section in here where these lines are really close together, where it's going to be better. Well, try to position a boat and keep it straight up against here without coming into the 7.5 feet. It can be very complicated. It can be difficult. So I like to say they're lazy, but maybe that's just lazy on my part. It's because it's a lot of work to do. A kayak, it's easy. You just bump the pedals forward and backwards, and you can stay right along this ledge right here and fish it all the way in. And by the way, right here, this little spot right here, I have some really nice fish. You can check out previous videos. Some really nice fish caught literally right here, coming off of this and drifting back through here on the kayak and then coming back up this side. There were also some up here. Some things that you want to consider if you're fishing a boat is you have to be able to control where you're going, and you have to be able to plan. So if you don't have navionics, if you don't have some pre-planning going into it, if you don't have an understanding of where the wind is, you're going to have to react on the water. Because if you have, in this case, a wind coming out of the south, from the southeast, from the bottom right of this screen all the way up to the top left, well, it's just going to kind of push you in this line. But where do you want to set up? You can't really set up here, right? This is a pretty bad spot to try to fish if you have the wind that's going to push you right into this beach. I mean, that's a good way to sink your boat. It's a good way to have a really bad day. You might catch a couple fish in this little tiny section in here, but then you're going to hit the ground, and then you're going to, this surf fisherman up here is going to be laughing at you as you're up into his gear. So you have to understand that you have to plan ahead. So you have to plan your drifts ahead of time if you can, and when you're on the water, adjust from there. So let's take a look at some spots where you would do that. In this case, remember, the current flow is the important thing. The current is coming in this inlet, and let's say it's coming down in this area here. So this is really deep. It starts up at 30 feet here, and it comes down to 50 right here. Comes down into the 60s down in this hole. So up in this section up here, it's 45 feet. So you've got this rise here, a flat area here, and a drop here. So if you want to fish this, you can actually do a fairly long drift coming down in here, come back up the other side, and then over this. You probably wouldn't get much after you get up to the top. But then as you drop down in here, you can do it again over on this side of the hole. But what if you have a south wind? It's coming straight from the bottom to the top. That's a really tough drift. The current's coming from right to left as it comes in the inlet, but you have a south wind that's going to push you up in this direction. So you're going to have to adjust your approach to this and not start up in here. You're going to have to come down here, and maybe you come all the way down to where it's 21.5 feet here, and you let the current take you up towards the left and the wind take you up towards the top. So now you're going to take this drop on this side. You're going to drop down from 35 to 43 to 50, and you're going to come back up this side. So your drift, you can't do that drift that we already talked about. The wind is going to force you to come in this direction. So you have to be able to change. 99% of boaters will never change. They will just sit here and try to drift here, and they'll start up here, try to get their long drift, and they end up turning this way. And now they're back up in this section. Well, if you take a look at this, there's not while it's dropping, these lines are far apart. These are 1 foot increments in depth. So it's only changing 1 foot over this entire distance, 3-4 feet over this distance. That's a long way to drift the boat for not much change in depth. But if you look over here, it goes from 43 to 50 in half that distance. So you've got a 7-foot drop in about half the distance. Well, most boats are going to set up here. They're going to try to get through these holes. They're going to try to drift with the current, and the wind is going to pull them up here. And they fished literally nothing good. It's just flat. It's just all flat through here. And then they're going to pick up because now they're in the 20-foot range. And you get a little bit of a incline here, but most people will come up through here and they say, yeah, you know what? We've caught shorts all day. Yeah, because the big fish are sitting down here and all the little fish are set up in this kind of wasteland up here. So they're kind of missing that. So you'd want to start down here, let the wind push you up, and let the current pull you left. And then you should be able to get this drop, and then you can get this rise over here. But it's all about short drifts in that case, right? You gotta make sure that you're in the right spot, and you're going to have to work. If it's a windy day, it's a working day. You're just going to have to be on the pedals. If you're in a kayak, you're going to have to be on the trolling. If you have a trolling motor, all the better for you. If you don't, get a drift sock. That'll help you as well in some circumstances. Let's say it's a really stiff south wind and it's really pushing you up and the current just isn't pulling you enough across. So all your drifts are straight from the bottom to the top. And with just a very slight move to the left, throw the drift sock out there. It'll pull this direction even harder, and it'll try to keep you going at least with the current a little bit more. And we do know it is important to go with the current. These ambush predators are facing generally into the current, looking for the food that's coming towards them. That's why they're ambush predators. They set up there because they know that's where the food's going to come from. Well, if they're set up looking up current and you're coming too far from, almost behind them to go straight up from the bottom to the top, it's not a natural presentation. It's at least semi-natural if you're starting over here and you're coming from the bottom up towards the top left, right? So you get it, at least you're coming somewhat with the current. You're just going across it a little bit, but you're still going with the current. And that's where a drift sock would come in. If you don't have a drift sock, use a cooler. Just make sure it has a really good handle or else you're going to lose that cooler. But tie it off, throw it out there, let it get under the water, and then it'll pick up that current and it'll pull you down there. If you have a larger boat, 2 drift socks, and you can position your boat with that as well. You can put it on the spring line cleat. You can put it on the back cleat. Wherever you put it, it's going to help you position the boat too. So if you have multiple people fishing, you'll be able to fish that way. You can actually fish with your back into the current if you have 2 drift socks out the front, one off of each front spring line. You could do that as well. So just keep that in mind. If it's a windy day, it's a working day for you, but there's no reason why it can't be just as productive. One of the things that was brought up by Participation Trophy was the scoping. So let's talk about that real quick. Now, John Halkias and I talked about this, and there were a couple things, and I don't necessarily have all my thoughts perfectly arranged on this, but I do know that I don't really see eye to eye with John on the entire scoping issue. I agree it's not great to scope, but to me, it just means you change your presentation. The question is, why are you scoping? Are you scoping because your boat is moving too fast? If that's the reason, well, you change your presentation. As long as you're holding bottom, you change your presentation. You think about it when you're scoping, and let me put myself on the screen here so maybe you can see me a little bit here. If you're scoping, for those that are watching, it basically means that instead of a vertical presentation of your lure, your line is now off to the side, right? So when you're jigging diagonally. So what that basically means is you're for every time you lift, every time that you jig, you're pulling it along the bottom and it's not coming off the bottom as much as when you're totally vertical. But if you're going the same speed as the current, that just means that you have to change the way that you're jigging. Now, if you're scoping because your boat is going too fast and you're going faster than the current, then yes, you can have some big problems in that case. Um, because it'll just look like, this food highway is coming down for the fluke or the weak fish, and they see this predictable flow of bait, and all of a sudden a NASCAR comes racing down the middle. Well, they're probably not going to pick up and chase that NASCAR. It's like if you've ever been on the Atlantic City Expressway and you see a speed trap and you're going a little too fast. Maybe you're going 75 and you slow down a little bit and you're still speeding, you're going 70. And then a car flies by you at 100. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but I have seen it. The cops pull out and they pull over the guy doing 70 because it's not worth the energy and the time to go chasing that guy that just flew by in the Porsche going like 100 miles an hour. They just don't do it all the time. Well, think about a fluke or think about a weak fish. They're expending calories to turn around and chase that. Why would they chase your bait for what they perceive to be the same number of calories as the next bait that comes through at the speed of the current? It's just extra work there's no return on investment for them. So remember, they're eating to survive. They're not eating just because they like to taste of chocolate cake and there was some extra in the refrigerator. They're eating because they need those calories to survive. So they have to eat more calories than they expend every time they go after some prey. So that can be a real big concern. And I think that's what John is typically referring to when he talks about scoping. And I do know that a lot of people talk about it incorrectly from my perspective. I think that if you're just scoping, that's not an issue if you're bringing it in with the current. And a good example of that is what a lot of people don't do in the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic is they don't fan cast or cast out for flounder. They won't cast. They'll just drop it straight down and they'll only do it in depths that are great enough for them to do it. Well, you miss out on a lot of fluke if you won't go up into the shallows. And if your boat can't reach there, but you can get close enough to cast, then you don't have an excuse. You can still do it. And they will at times be up in those 3-foot channels if it's 2 feet around them. That 1 foot difference in depth can be all the difference because that's the channel through the flats. So you can fish those. Well, go back to the scoping. When you toss out that bucktail and you launch it out 50 yards, you're scoping the entire way in. You're scoping. You have to be. That's what it is when you're retrieving. And you just have to change the way that you're retrieving. You have to change your jigs. Maybe they're a little softer. Maybe they're a little bit more powerful to get it up off the ground and skipping over the bottom. But from the standpoint of scoping, you have to understand why. Figure it out. And one of the best ways to do it is if you find yourself scoping, grab, a heavy bucktail. Well, first of all, the bucktail that you have on there and just drop it. Let's say you're in 30 feet of water, drop it 20 feet and see which direction it goes and how far. And if it's going, if it's just scoping a little bit out and you drop it to the bottom and it goes really far, well, maybe you just have a weight that's too heavy and you're dragging the bottom too much. And then you can just keep switching out your bucktails and your weights until you get it proper. But if you're at a good drift speed and you're drifting your bait that's not on the bottom and it's vertical, you are drifting the same speed as the current on the bottom. And keep in mind, currents on the bottom can be totally different than the currents at the top. It could be almost not moving at the top, but going at 3 miles per hour down below you. You want to match that bottom current where the fish are. If you're fishing the bottom, if you're fishing for weak fish in your mid column, check the mid column, and that's where you want to look, especially if you're jigging. In that case, the scoping really doesn't matter as much for the presentation, except for the fact again that you're going to be pulling more sideways than vertical on those jigs. So yeah, so that's the whole thing about scoping. Those are the things that you need to understand. And it can be, and it looks scoping, it gets all of us. There are just times where it's just unfishable because you're throwing a 6 ounce on and you only have a rod that's rated for 2 ounce. And then you got a problem because, you're not only not feeling the bites, but you're into the backbone just on the jig, and it makes the hook set really difficult. So that's where the scoping comes in. I'm not going to go a ton into that. We could do an entire show on that, and I'm not prepared to do that tonight. But keep that in mind, and don't. The one thing I'll leave you with is don't assume that all scoping is bad. A lot of scoping is fine if it's happening for the right reasons, right? So just don't give up just because you're scoping. Now, if you just can't hold bottom, no matter how much weight you have, no matter how many drift socks you have out, no matter how hard your trolling motor is going, okay, maybe that's a bad day. Maybe you just have to pack it up. But for the most part, we can overcome these things with some work out on the water. So you want to do that. All right. So that's an example of this spot. And again, I'm not telling you fish this spot. I don't even know if it still looks like this, to be honest with you. I haven't been in this area in a while. But I just thought that, this inlet, famous inlet, it has a lot of different changes. And I can give a lot of different examples of how to find fish, where the currents are going to go, and where the fish are likely going to be based on those currents. And this is just an obvious one to do because you've got this drop here, but this is really the good one. Once the fish transition deep, when you're down at, this looks like 69 feet right down in here. Let me blow this up for you. It's 69 feet down in this section here. You can really, look at the depth change, 45 to 69. That's a pretty significant drop, especially right here where the lines are closer together. So look for that on these charts. Get the 1 foot increments and find where these lines are closest together. That's your most severe changes in depth. That's where you want to fish. We can go through here and point out all the places I wouldn't fish. I wouldn't fish anywhere in here. This is nothing. This is flat. Yeah, there's some undulations in there, but there's really no current changes. There's no current breaks in there. You're going to have current breaks in here. You're going to probably have eddies. If you come up to this section, this is one that I did want to talk about. Again, the current coming in from right to left in through here. It's going to come over this section up here, and it's going to drop down these little shelves. So you can see, 20 feet, but it doesn't even matter the depth. It's coming from shallow and it's dropping, right? And what is it? 9 feet up here. And then look how fast it gets down to 28 once you get out here. So this is all flat, basically. And then it's going to drop off here. So if the current's coming in this direction from right to left, it's going to come through here. It's going to kick off of this, and you got an eddy back in here. The closer you get to these numbers because of the distance, the more of an eddy that you're going to have. So you're going to have a nice eddy in here. So think about the spring tide when that current's really flowing and they need to get a little bit of a break from that current. Well, any bait fish that is swept around here is likely going to spin back around and through here. So if you're a 25-inch fluke, aren't you sitting right here? And if there are 16 inchers in the way, aren't you pushing them out? This is the spot that you want to be. There's another one. This just kind of steps down. There's another one right here. The difference is once you get down here, again, you have to look at the current flow. It's coming up and around and in, right? So it's coming in this direction. It's not coming up here and taking a hard left. So you're going to have less current back here. So the further you get back here, the less current flow you're going to have. Your best current flow is going to be up here. The other indication of that is when you have this depth, that's typically the strong currents have bored this out over time, and that's where you're going to be, right? And so this is probably the best area that you're going to look at right in here if you're not coming up towards this hole and taking advantage of this drop. This is pretty good when you think coming through because it's going to come around here and it's all going to flow down here and it's going to kind of hit this wall. Right. So if it comes in this way and it hits this wall, it's going to spin it up a little bit in this direction, unless it's coming straight in this way. Then it's just going to come down one side and up the other. So that's how you would break down that type of spot. Again, take advantage of the wind and the tools that you have available to you, whether it's drift sock or a cooler, whatever it is, a trolling motor, ideally. And you can work your way through here and you can work every one of these sides. And yeah, there's multiple spots in here. This whole thing is not a spot, but there are little spots in here that you can fish. This down here, that 29, where this 29 is, this is a spot. This is an area, right? So you can't say I fished off of the lighthouse. Okay, that's great. That's an area, but there's, this spot will not produce the same as this spot. This person over here fishing near you also fished off of the lighthouse and they got nothing. And you slammed them because you fished these ledges in here, or this ledge up here looks like a really good one right up in here. All right, so this is something that I would consider. Now, if you want to go further in the back, I haven't looked in this. I don't know how it's changed since I've been there. Yeah, this is an interesting spot up here. You got the same thing. You got the currents coming in here, and look at this. It's not as deep. You have this 11-foot drop here, but you have these little shelves. So you have this off of this island. I've done well, and actually this looks like a decent area back in here because you have the 11-foot, and you have this little bump out in here, and that's going to help you. You're not going to be as stuck at the mercy of the currents with this little thing here. So you're going to have a fish sitting back there. It's going to have a little bit less resistance in the water when it's just trying to, when it's trying to maintain its spot. It's not fighting as hard. It's not burning as many calories. And that's an important thing. That's very important for them. Just give me 1 second here, if you would. I've got to fix something here before I lose power. While I'm doing this, are there any questions in there so far? So I'm not seeing a ton. Some good conversation in the chat, but I'm not seeing a lot of questions. Maybe that's good. Or maybe this is just not hitting home with people. I don't know. All right, I'm back in business here. Let me just scroll through here real quick. Nick Devereaux, did I see you on the cover of a magazine? I think I saw you on a cover of a magazine. All right. I'm going to do one more. So again, this spot right in here, that could be good. Now, the concerning thing here is the 3.5 feet, but I'm looking at the structure itself, right? So don't go and fish this spot. It might be too shallow. I'm just saying that the way that this goes, the way that the current comes down here, if it's a situation where the fish are going to be shallow, this is absolutely going to hold them. If we come further down, I think there's one more spot, if I remember correctly. Down here further. No, this has changed. No, it's changed. All right, I'm sorry. It's changed since I've been there. It's been a couple of years. We can come back near these docks. And we've got 5.5, 8 feet, 5.5, 8 feet. These docks, this dock looks like it could be good right in here. You can see where it comes from the 11. And if the current's coming down through here, it gets real shallow real quick, but look how it sticks out. So you've got a little bit of an indentation in here, a little bit of a buckle near that dock. Behind these pilings may be good because it's not only on the drop, but it's right off of the main flow of the current here because the main flow is interrupted by this depth change. So this first dock up here could be a good one to look at. I don't see anything on the left coming out of the marshes. That's really interesting. All of these docks look like it's pretty much a wasteland of just flat. It's just flat. It's just 4.5 feet under those docks the entire way down. So if that is actually what it is in real life, I would not be fishing those. Yeah, this entire thing looks pretty bad. This looks good here. Here's a good example. Look at this dock here. And you can see on the screen, this could be a spot. The flow is now on, if it's coming down from the top left to the bottom right, because that's the only way the channel goes. Let's say it's the incoming, it's coming down in this direction. It's coming 8 feet, 8 feet. It has this little buckle up here on the previous dock. And then look at this right here. So it's very shallow up here and it's got a 4-foot drop down to 12 feet behind there. So this current coming down here is going to fall and spill off of there. So everything that's being swept through here now is going to fall into a deeper area. Because it's deeper at the bottom of that drop, not all the time, but a lot of the time there's going to be some type of a current break near the bottom where a fluke specifically would be able to sit behind or sit next to and take advantage of the less current flowing over them, the good eyes on the bait going through that predictable area, and they can just kind of launch out from here. So whoever owns this house should probably be fishing right in here when they're out having a beer at night. Just go to the end of the dock and just kind of drop it back in here and jig in this section in there. So that actually looks like it could be a good dock. And then down here, this is an interesting one. So if we come down to the south side of this entire area, and let me just pan it out so you can see what we're looking at. So this section right here, you can see this big change in depth. This is very shallow, and it's 5.5 feet, 4.5 feet, 5.5 drops to 14. So think about the outgoing. All this water that's back in these bays, right back in here, it's going to start moving out from right to left and then up from the bottom right to the top left. So it's going to come out up this channel. So all of this in here will start sweeping down around this corner. So you can say, okay, I fish anywhere in here. Yeah, but it's this spot right here, right on the property line between these two houses, where it goes from 14, it goes 5.5 down to 14 to 13.5. So it comes a little bit up right up in here. Then it's 16.5 back here. This drop right here, you going from 14 basically to 16.5 after coming out of 5. This is going to be a very predictable area for these bait fish, for anything that's getting swept out of these back bays to get out into this channel and then just get swept up in this direction. And when I say swept up, maybe it's killies, maybe it's minnows, it's just bait fish. You know, if it is, they're swimming that way. And if they're swimming out here, they're just going to kind of go with the current, and the current's going to bring them through this predictable area. So again, this is this big area. You can say, yeah, I fished the mouth of that bay that you talked about. No, that's the area. This is the spot. I would fish this spot first, and I would probably fish this spot second, unless I had a good drift that would take me from this spot and up and then back down. If I could position there and get that to work, I would fish. I'd actually start up in the shallows, take care of that drop down in there, come back up along this ridge, and then down into this section back here. You should have a decent underwater eddy right here. You may not even see it from the surface, but you can tell by the way that this water is and this little wall right here that there's going to be something in there that's going to change the current flow, and it's going to push fish into a smart spot. All right, so let's talk. So the question is, what website is this? As I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, I used to use Navionics, and Garmin, in the most Garmin way possible, totally screwed it up. So I found that I wasted all of my money to renew a subscription, and they don't have these online anymore like they used to. So Navionics is one. I'm looking at other things to switch to. This is Smart Spots from Salt Strong. You can't use this on the water, so I won't recommend using it. You need something on the water because, as we all know, when you get out on the water, the wind is not going to be 5 miles per hour from the south like they forecasted on 6 different sites that you looked at. It's going to be 10 from the east. Well, your entire plan for the day has changed. So unless you can have a really good capability on your depth finders, on your low rants or whatever you have, I would just look at C maps or something like that. I think I'm probably going to switch over to C maps. So I don't recommend using this on the water. I'm using it because I have it, and it's good for displaying on the computer, but I haven't found a good one that's good for both yet. And this doesn't go into, like, I can't just put these maps onto my low rants like I used to be able to for Navionics. By the way, I don't know if anyone's noticed, I was out last week, and I can't tell you how much of the day Joe and I spent, according to Navionics, on dry land. It said it's dry land, but we're sitting at 16 feet of water. So the charts are off. And actually you can see this one's off, because this is telling us that right up in here, if you can see, this house is underwater in 4.5 feet of water, right? So actually this, if you pull this out, I mean, this is wrong. I mean, smart fishing spots is wrong too. It's not lined up. It can't be lined up because there's no way this $1 million house has been sitting in 4.5 feet of water. It's just not the case. So anyway, that's what this is. Smart fishing spots. Once I find something that I think is good for using at home for your pre-trip planning and on the water, I will absolutely let everybody know what I think is the best one. In the meantime, throw in chat, throw your recommendations to me. Rich at fatdadfishing.com. You can just send me an email there, or you can send it to my business one, which I check a lot more often. It's just Richard Natoli at kw.com. I'd love to see your recommendations, but one thing that I always want to do is I want to use the same source when I'm at home planning as when I'm on the water. I don't want them to be different, because if they're different, then it's why am I doing the planning? I want to be as precise as I can in advance. So long answer to a very simple question, but I'm seeing the Humminbird coastal maps. It's way off in the outside of the main channels. That's what Stephen Duda is saying. Navionics is off. We can see smart fishing spots, or smart whatever it's called, is off. I don't know. I can't give you a good answer. So send me what you guys have, and I'll share it with everybody. All right. So that's it. That's what I was going to go through today. The important thing is understand the tides, understand the currents, and understand the impact that those have on you when you're on the water. When it's windy, you're working. When the tides are really flowing, change your spots. Again, don't fish the same spots for a neap tide that you're fishing for a spring tide, because the current flow is much different. And always remember, these fish are eating to survive. They're not eating for pleasure. I use the example of the chocolate cake. They're not looking for chocolate cake. They're looking for calories. And they're only going to go after things that are going to be providing more calories than what they're expending to go get it. So if it's a really incredibly strong current, stay out of that current. Get on the current seam where it's a little bit less of a fight for them, because that's where they want to be. They want to sit on the side and they want to pick off the easy food. So make it as easy as possible for them. You're going to have a lot more success on the water. And hopefully you'll be sharing all that with me. And if you disagree with anything, send me an email as well. I'd love to hear it. So that's that. I'll be back next week. So until next week, everybody, if you can with this weather, get out there, get on the water, and get some tight lines.